I want to interrupt my flow of questions here and get to a couple of audience questions because we've got a pile of good ones coming in, and I think I'll start with one that I see. I look for repetitive words, and I'm seeing repetitive questions around Q12. The questions would be around, don't forget Q12 is life cycle consumes resources for years. How important is Q12 and what aspects should sponsors be aware of regarding Q12? So,
yeah, I mean, I don't want to put my judgment necessarily on everybody here in the audience, but I tend to prefer to have some control over what's coming in the future. And so this whole question, when you're certainly embedded in an environment where you have a clinical product or multiple ones that you want to get across the finish line, in other words, into the commercial market at some point, even if you are doing that with a partner, or even if you are trying to actually perhaps be acquired. I do think it's important to think about what comes post-approval. And it's not an easy question. So Q12 is about life cycle management, right? So it gives some good insights into how to manage that. And the real question is, do it now or do it later, right? And how can you make that decision on what to do now versus later? Most of the time, I think companies who are in early clinical development really don't look at that, and they rightfully so, because they're very focused on what's here and now. And there are certain things that one might decide that if it delays you to approval, you may weigh that against the potential for your market share, right? So that is absolutely realistically happening. If it delays you too much and it is a nice to have, it is likely going to end up in post-approval. But even with the work on COVID, even with the work on biosimilars, a lot of things that are CMC requirements do really not become any easier just because you might be on an accelerated path. You're still going to have to deal with it. And the real question is it better now or is it better later? What I hear mostly, the companies kind of agreeing on who are dealing with a lot of post-approval changes, is that the nightmare of the dissected supply chain in the end. And this goes right back to this topic for today of regulatory harmonization. Because when you make post-approval changes, you have to submit them, right, for approval. So then you have some countries who accept it in 30 days, some countries who accept it in 6 months, some countries who don't accept it at all and want more data. And all of a sudden, you have to deal with a potential tremendously complicated split in your supply chain. So I would caution and at least think a little bit about, is it better now or is it better later? You got to invest initially.
Yeah, this is and I just want to take a minute to recognize. Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
I could make some comments on that too. We do a lot of that. This is an area where we offer advice as to, as Steffi points out, what changes can we make, and do we make those now or do we make those later? And for most sponsors who are in early development, the priority is speed to clinic. How quickly can we get this product into a first-in-human study? Because the sponsor doesn't know if the product works yet. There's no validation of whether or not this is ever going to be a drug, and so there's a strong incentive to move forward and fail fast, if you will, both on their part and on the part of their investors. And so with that in mind, we will help them to recognize what are the developments that are nice to have that ultimately will be required upon application for licensure, but certainly are not required now. And so those are active decisions that we're making at each stage of development, from preclinical through each of the clinical stages of development. as CMC comes into play. I'll give you a couple of examples. For monoclonal antibodies, for example, upon licensure, a cell-based potency method will be required in order for that product to be licensed for approval. In other words, an assay that confirms the mechanism of action of the product. That cell-based assay is expected to be implemented in later stages of clinical development. So there's no expectation on the part of regulatory authorities, FDA in particular, that a cell-based potency method will be included early on. And so we advise our clients, there's no need for that. We don't need to do that now. Now, that is different for certain product classes. Antibody drug conjugates, for example, a cell-based potency method is required, is expected to be part of that early application. And bispecific antibodies that are in which the targeting mechanism is anti-CD3, that's the same case. Cell-based methods demonstrating that the mechanism of action is intact is also expected early on. But you know, these are situations where you kind of have to know what can we put off, what do we need to do now. One other example is manufacture of a working cell bank. We advise our clients to delay the setting down a working cell bank until late stage development. Why? Because again, it's not something that's required. You don't even know if the drug works yet. Let's get to a point where we've got some greater assurance that this is in fact going to see the light of day before we invest resources such as a working cell bank.